welcome to Two Brave Unicorns with Carrie and Jill, the show where bold ideas and big hearts collide. Each episode, we shine a spotlight on people, companies, and nonprofits who are driving change through innovation or simply by doing good. You'll hear stories that spark inspiration, deliver fresh insights, and hopefully keep you entertained along the way. Today's guest is Dan Hirleman, PhD. I was lucky enough to meet Dan through Carrie. Carrie, tell us how you met Dan.
So I met Dan while working at an innovation center. I was asked to help write a grant, and the grant was to establish the Securing Space Assets Tech Hub in Colorado Springs, Colorado. And they said we're going to have 3 labs, well, 2 labs. I had to come up with a third one, but one of the labs was the data mine. So look up the data mine. So I kept trying to find the data mine. I'm like, what is the data mine? And I couldn't find it online. And then finally I found it, and I was like, oh, I'm all in on the data mine. This is amazing. I was on a call with Space ISAC where I met Dan, who was the Purdue point of contact working on the grant. And I kind of asked him some questions, and then I went off and wrote about the grant, and I came back and he was like, wow, you really get the data mine. And we have established a friendship since then. We continue to work together on the data mine. And I have to say that if I were describing Dan to anybody, I would have to say that you are probably the kindest, nicest man I've ever met, like just genuinely nice person. And that means a lot to me. So, to start us off, welcome to the show and let us know what you're doing and then what's your mission.
Okay, well, thanks. And thanks for having me and for that introduction, Carrie. And I will say it was an amazing job she did starting from scratch and putting together the story of the data mine with some really neat parts that I hadn't thought of myself. That's when I said, wow, I'm not sure I could have written that. So Carrie gets the data mine. So where did I start? I guess it goes back to maybe high school. And so I had this friend and we eventually were in AP calculus and AP physics classes together. At some point he said, well, what are you going to study in college? And I said, I don't know. And he said, well, you ought to be an engineer. So I said, okay. Then a little later he said, well, where are you going to go to college? I said, well, the KU or K-State. I said, well, my dad's an Illinois PhD in engineering, and my dad says Purdue is the best undergraduate engineering college in the country, and I'm going to Purdue. So I said, well, if it's good enough for this guy, who was the smartest guy I've ever known, it's good enough for me. So I followed him to Purdue. I declared for mechanical engineering. Then a few years later, I met a professor in thermodynamics. He asked me, do I want to do some research? So eventually he was my master's advisor. He was my PhD advisor. After I graduated from Purdue, took a job at Arizona State, came back to Purdue eventually 20 years later as head of the department I was in. Through the years, I've really been excited by projects that are different and get students engaged in an active way. The last one I've been working on is the data mine, which is another way where we engage students at all ages in their careers, interdisciplinary teams, working on real projects with sponsors, which means the projects mean something. They're not play projects. They're real outcomes and real results. And so that's kind of how I got to working with the data mine these days.
You had a storied collegiate career. It took me a very long time to get out of college. I don't know if you even know that my major is liberal arts. And you said that you went in and asked what makes the most money. I went into my college advisor who knew me very well because I was constantly in there negotiating. What is the fastest way that I can get out of here?
Yeah.
And he said, well, it seems that you have like all these kind of random classes. So probably liberal arts, but you may end up having like 5 or 6 minors. And I was like, that tracks. I deferred a semester to go work on a political campaign. And I told my dad I was doing this. And my dad said, okay, the Don Cotterman scholarship is expiring. So if you think that this is going to take you where you want to go in life, then do it. Like go do the internship, but you have to graduate. And I said, don't worry, I'm going to graduate. And it was a presidential election year. The president won the campaign that I was working with. And I was offered a job to go to DC and work on the presidential inaugural committee. And I didn't even really bring it up because it wasn't an option. I was going to go and finish school because I had made that promise. Anyway, I had to go in that semester, sit in on all of the classes that I had deferred and register for 18 credits in order to graduate. So that last semester of school, I took 36 hours.
Oh, gee.
And I knew that they wouldn't let me do it. So I didn't tell anybody until after midterms, went into my advisor and said, okay, so can I graduate? And he's like, no, you're like 18 credits short. I'm like, no, but I'm sitting in. He said, Carrie, you can't do that. I said, I am doing it. I have a 4.0. And so it's going to happen. He said, if you maintain your GPA, I'll let you do this. That's how I graduated.
36 hours is some sort of a record, I think.
Yeah, I kind of had to do a similar thing. I was at Cal and I started a semester late to go live with my dad in Michigan after high school. I got closer to my senior year and realized all my friends were going to be gone. I did not want to be there any longer. So I did it all in 3.5 years. I declared a film major and it was a very small major. So every film class was in the same classroom. I would sit there from 8 until 6 every day in the same classroom. So, and I also want to add that both my parents went to Purdue and my dad was a mechanical engineer, just like you, Dan.
I undoubtedly wrote him and asked him for money over the years.
Yeah, right. Probably. I have a question for you. I want you to tell us what is data science and why should we care about it? Because a lot of people don't quite understand what it is.
Well, I think of data science as trying to mine or extract or harvest as much information as you can from the data you have. And Department of Defense divisions have data from sensors that they've never used. And so the trick is, how can you pull it in, make sure it's accurate, clean out the pieces that are not right, and then begin to draw conclusions, allow you to make decisions on what to do regarding a situation. And you want to have as much data as you possibly can. So the mechanics of processing the data, pulling it together, making a decision, or informing a decision, I'd call that the process of data science.
I'd love to know an example of one just to get a better understanding. Could you share like one company that used data mine and how they found an innovation or solved a problem?
Probably we have a really great use case. It was last semester, and the project was provided by the Space Operations Command, which is now the Combat Forces Command. They work on space domain awareness, trying to know everything that's going on in space. And so their problem was look at all the locations on Earth, look out in the next 72 hours, hour by hour, and tell us whether someone could launch a rocket from any latitude and longitude on Earth and satisfy what's called the launch commit criteria. Generally, that'd be things like, is there lightning? Is there too much wind shear? So that was the question. Tomorrow afternoon at 2, what's the probability that an adversary could have the conditions they need to launch a rocket? So tough problem, right? Because this is about there's 124 conditions that you really need to know about to make this decision, and it has to do with wind velocities at all altitudes. So to start out, there's various sources for that weather data. And the idea is we're going to try to forecast what's going to go on in the next 72 hours. And so we have to pull data from multiple sources and then look at what was happening 72 hours out from those days and what the forecasts were and what they should have been. So that's one part of this problem, is really understanding the weather and knowing what affects whether or not you can launch a rocket. Now, the next problem is we need to know what different people use in terms of factors of safety for launching a rocket. The U.S. has pretty transparent conditions on that. It's much more restrictive if you're launching humans, less so if you're launching a satellite. And you can imagine those vary across the world. If I see a variety of things going on in the world, I want to know, what are the chances that if they could get this all together, could they launch a rocket in the next 3 days? So a lot of interesting information from weather predictions from multiple sources. We know a lot about what gets launched in the U.S. We know less about what gets launched other places. We used all public domain data to do this. So this team created a tool and a dashboard that's now in a startup in the Space Domain Awareness TAP Lab in Colorado Springs. And so this was 11 kids from 5 universities from 9 majors that pulled this together in 9 months in 2 semesters. So it was very exciting to the launch operators, because if you're going to make a decision to do something to try to preempt something you think is going to happen, this is a piece of data they did not have. It's just another piece of the puzzle of space domain awareness, but it was one that wasn't available in the form that our students built it. And that's why it's now part of a startup.
When I first started really understanding about data was in the political space, right? And it was all about adding attributes to people so that we could get them to vote for the people that we wanted them to vote for. And it was very popular at the time, called micro-targeting. And I just fell in love with that process. It was so fascinating to me that we could in mass figure out how to convince people to do something or not do something, where, before you do that, just kind of like one-on-one, whether it's at the door or over the phone. And that whole process kind of like kicked off my love affair with data. It really does tell a story. It's really interesting because sometimes you can like set out to solve a problem with data and you realize the questions you were asking aren't even the right questions. So you could have been on a path that teaches you something totally unexpected. What is the most interesting thing that you've learned from data?
I think the thing that excites me the most is you're pulling out new knowledge. I mean, that's why I got into research. How can you invent things, create something, know something that almost nobody else in the world does? And that can happen on a regular basis if you get the right data.
What about you, Jill? Does anything come to your mind?
Well, the data that I dealt with in my past career were ratings. And I remember when we were producing Surreal Life, season 3 came out and we had Flavor Flav and Brigitte Nielsen on that episode and really liked each other. And they could not be more opposite. I don't know if you can picture either one of them, but they were a hit on that show. And so when we got the ratings for that first episode, it broke all the records. And I ran into my boss's office screaming like, you don't understand. We've never hit this number before. And he's like, oh, this is good, right? Yeah, this is really good. And then from there, we did Flavor of Love, and it was the highest rated show I'd ever worked on. It was such a phenomenon. At one point, our data showed that 1 in 4 African Americans in the United States was watching Flavor of Love. That was more African American people watching a television show than were watching BET. And they were not happy about that at the time. But that was the data that I lived in.
Data is a lot about establishing patterns. And when I was young, I was obsessed with marine life. I've remained kind of obsessed by it. I know way more than I should about it, not being in that profession. When they started tracking the behaviors of orcas, they determined that they hunt differently in each ocean. They can adapt. So in the Pacific Ocean, they've learned how to take down a great white shark. So one of them will go. So there's like a particular place on a gill that if you hit it, it paralyzes the shark and it turns upside down. And so only in the Pacific Ocean do they do this, where one stuns it and then the rest of them kill it. But it's amazing to me that they use data to establish these patterns, follow these orcas, and know these things. And then the most disappointing data I think I've ever heard was after a second recount on a campaign that I worked on, we lost by 36 votes.
Oh, that's crushing.
It was crushing.
Yeah.
But 'tis what it is.
Yes.
Dan, I don't think you said exactly what is the data mine?
The data mine is a model of engagement for students to interact with companies and government entities and work on their problems. So there are many ways that students engage with companies. Traditionally, internships, cooperative education, projects where the companies bring them in. All those are traditional models, have been around a long time, but the data mine is unique in that we take students from all majors and try to give them an experience that's using real data to try to come up with real solutions, and do that over 2 semesters and with projects inspired and contributed by sponsors. And so the experience of actually working with real data and helping companies make decisions, whether you're a sophomore or a grad student, that's the magic, I think, of the data mine. And we start students young, and the very best young men and women that are on the teams, as undergraduates, we can make them teaching assistants. And so we're running 100 projects right now. We've had 7,379 students involved in the various data mine ecosystem at Purdue from 159 majors. And So that scale is just unheard of. And we've done that in 6 years.
Amazing.
It's really impressive. And I just think that you can't mimic that in a corporate setting because you're not going to have the liberal arts major that fell in love with data having a conversation with someone who's a computer science major, bringing about that thought, because I think you need some creativity in the data science process. You need some different viewpoints because if all you're doing is churning out numbers, you're not trying to read between the lines, right? So you need different patterns of thought and different types of people, and you foster that and encourage that. I mean, e-commerce, marketing, sales, it's all data, right? Like no matter what your industry is, it's underscored by data, whether you realize it or not.
And we're agnostic to the application, right? To the set. So we can bring the same team together. And you might have an expert, you might have a sociologist that becomes a subject matter expert for that, but you might have another, a orbital mechanics problem predicting collisions or something, right? And you might have the subject matter expert be an aerospace engineer on the team, but the rest of the team is basically the same. We're trying to convert the problem into a data science definition and then working on it together. So we do think it's a pretty unique model.
So as we mentioned, I've worked with Dan for a while.
Mhm.
Jill has, through 2BU, our company and extension of the Two Brave Unicorn podcast, we recently worked on the fall symposium with Data Mine of the Rockies, which we'll talk about. But Jill, I'm just kind of curious from your first look perspective, what did you think of the data mine? Like, what are your thoughts on it, having kind of just learned about it and gotten to see it and hear from students and all of that?
Honestly, I was so impressed. Carrie was explaining to me what you guys did, but it wasn't until I was there for the symposium. And these are undergraduate students. These
Yeah.
these are like sophomores.
Some of them.
They're like not even 20 years old. And they are like solving these major problems. And they were all so impressive. The way they presented, the way they approached problems for these companies. I was so proud of these kids. How do you not just cry when you hear how hard they work on this and how they take it so seriously and they take pride in it? And you could tell they were all really excited to present what they had learned. And I just thought it was an amazing event. I was glad I got to be a part of it.
It's such a cool program. I mean, it really, really is.
Yeah.
So tell us about Data Mine of the Rockies.
Okay. So the data mine at Purdue, the founder is Professor Mark Ward, outstanding, just a great guy. He got an NSF grant to do women in data science, took a corner of a dorm, built a living learning community for women in data science. And then the teams he put together and the projects would be go to the economics department and try to get a group of students that have a real interest in the data side of data intensive projects and have an academic or professor from that department come and advise it. At that time, I was chief officer, corporate and global partnerships for Purdue, and talking to all the companies, we always ask, what do you need in the students you're hiring? And regardless of the company, whether they build jet engines or automobile engines or pharmaceuticals, they all said, we need people that understand a little bit about data and even a little bit about cyber. To find a unicorn that's an aerospace engineer, but actually knows a lot about one of those two things as well, it's hard to do because it's not in the traditional curriculum. Now that's changing over time with AI right now, but that was certainly not the case 6 years ago. So I began to say, wow, this is something that the companies and Department of Defense could be very interested in. We had one project. We called it the Corporate Partners Program. So we had an academic and a corporate partners. We really focused on companies because it's easy for a company, because they all have foundations, or most of them do. It's easy for them to give a gift for scholarships or a program like this. It's an academic, it's for credit. At that time, we priced it at the cost of an intern. So if a big company in the middle of America building engines was going to hire a summer intern as a mechanical engineer from Purdue, what would you pay them? Turned out $5K times 3 plus $5K overhead, $20K. So we priced the data mine corporate partners at $20K 6 years ago. And that was the trade-off. Would you like to meet 10 or 12 students from a bunch of majors working on your project for 2 semesters, or have one intern? And I've done a lot of internships, so I love those. But this is just it's a complement to that. And it has a different impact on the workforce. So that's how I got into the data mine itself from the corporate side. But then I did a sabbatical in Colorado, and we never engaged with the Department of Defense. That's harder because it has to be a contract. The federal government cannot give you a gift. But I saw the same need for students that are knowledgeable early in data science. I don't think enough students are interested and understand what they could do being involved in defense, whether it's with a private company or one of our sectors. And so I got interested in building something that's focused on space and defense. That's in Colorado. That's how I met the people in the Space Force and the Space Command and the Catalyst Campus and the carriers of the world. And so that's when we started saying, hey, let's try to build something that's focused on space and defense. Why not do it in Colorado? We all know the concentration of space activities there. So it seemed like the perfect place to build our first regional model of the data mine. And we called it the data mine of the Rockies.
That's great. Do you guys envision opening more data mines?
Well, we do. We think every university needs a data mine, and every company and every government agency needs a mine. So there is another program. It's called the National Data Mine Network. And that was a National Science Foundation grant to give scholarships to students that want to be on a data mine team from minority serving institutions across the country. So we have 40-some minority serving institutions who are in the National Data Mine Network, and their students get to participate in the Purdue data mine projects. That has kind of a national feel, not a regional focus. So that's kind of the difference. I think every state, every region could benefit from this, every sector. So we have a couple things in the hopper. We're trying to build a national space data mine. So we believe that all the universities that are big players in space should pool together with all of the space entities, Space Force, Space Command, and intelligence community. So all those should band together and do something at scale where there could be data mine teams for all the different divisions. All the universities would do this. So we use undergraduates to build the program. Faculty are involved, but just a couple faculty. And so that's why you can run a program like this with all the effort that they get for relatively small dollars, cost of one intern. But the other thing that scales is with our TAs, mentoring load on the companies is less. So if you bring in an intern, turns out about 75% get an offer and about 75% of those accepted. So you get about a 1-1 acceptance ratio of an intern. But to make sure that works, you've got to spend a lot of time with them as an intern advisor. So that's great. They learn a lot about the corporate culture. I call it cultural immersion. If you plot all these programs on cultural immersion versus neurons per dollar, you get an interesting phase diagram. The data mine allows you to see a lot of students, 10 to 12 for an hour a week for 2 semesters, and get that knowledge of all those students, but have the mentoring going on larger scale by the TAs and by the data mine infrastructure. So that's the other aspect of scalability from the sponsor's position, the ability of us to deliver a program this scale at a reasonable cost.
And I'll say what you may not want to say, which is that any company that's listening, it is far more economical to go with the data mine than to go with the corporate partner for your data science need. It just is. It's less expensive, and I would argue may actually take less of your time because a company assigns one person to be a mentor, do 1 hour a week. And I can assure you that if you're doing that with a corporate partner, you've got multiple people that are spending way more than an hour a week getting all of that together. If you're listening and you have a data need, call Dan.
I love how, Dan, when you're describing how it all works, you're using data, every aspect of it. You're plotting the points on a graph to figure out how it makes sense.
I see the world in patterns. So I see the world in data, right? Like that's how my brain perceives things. And so that's when it's like when something is not computing, it's like, whoa, that's way out of order. Like we need to do something about that.
And it's like you said, Jill, when you first described this to someone in a company, they all know interns and they all know capstone senior design projects where you put, 5 kids that have been up through 4 years of education with the same education, often coming in, they look alike. Now they think alike. You put 5 of those on a project with a narrow topic and, narrow goal in their topic, they will run faster than a data mine team. That's true. But it turns out if they're really, really good and you really want to hire them, they already have a job by the time they're spring semester senior year. So they know those things. Well, the data mine's different. And I've been asked by a couple of people, come back when you can tell me how this tracks with hacking for defense. So people need this, these touch points to get their head around what the data mine really is. And it's kind of like, you said, as we explained it to you, but until you saw the students and heard from the mentors and saw the process, it's really hard to communicate. So we're all trying to figure out better ways to do that.
Do you find with the students, I know some of them were saying that they already have internships at some of these companies, so it is a great opportunity for them. But have you heard if it's affected graduates later in their career choices from having worked with DataMine?
Yeah, we should be doing that. We should be assessing the career trajectories of data mine graduates. Certainly, they're going to have a head start. I literally have a LinkedIn post today of a student from Northern Colorado who's on a data mine team who just got an internship for the summer. When you're on a data mine team, you have a story, and not every student has a story, and it's getting harder and harder to get internships. And so all the programs I built are to help students have a story so that they can compete.
You've accomplished so much in your life. I'm just curious sitting here, what are you most proud of?
I think it's a tie. I'll brag about 3 programs. I'll try to do it quickly. I've had a lot of different jobs, but one of them I went to the University of California, Merced. I was the second dean 4 years in. We had no accredited programs, no alums, no money, no facilities. It was a great job, but we had 2/3 first generation, 2/3 Pell eligible, 38% Hispanic in engineering, which is off the charts. So I went to the first class because I talked to all the graduating seniors and I said, hey, everybody, tell me about your internships. And there were 128 students and only 8 had internships. So these are graduating engineers from 4 different programs. They're trying to compete. And, at that time I had moved there from Purdue. So in Purdue Mechanical Engineering, that number is probably 95%. And we had maybe 10% international. So it's really hard for an international to get an internship. So you could almost call it 100% employment. And they were 8. So they're going to go interview against a Purdue student, never having had a internship to see what an engineer really does, only doing homework problems. That's a really tough situation. When you go into a new job, you don't really know what the job is until there's an aha moment. And that was it. I said, I got to build something to overcome that. So what I built was, it's called the Innovation and Design Clinic. And our year-end thing, we called Innovate to Grow. And so I basically said, we're going to have interdisciplinary capstone design teams, and we're going to have a corporate sponsor for every project. So it's kind of like the data mine, but it's a requirement. And then you'll have a real story. I was on a team. I'm a co-inventor. So that thing's been going on for 14 years now. The second thing I built was something called the Global Engineering Alliance and Research and Education. And my aha moment there was I walked into Purdue Mechanical Engineering in 2000. And so I said, okay, 350 graduating mechanical engineers this year. How many of you have had international credit bearing or internship experience? The answer to that question was 2. And I'm saying, I mean, you're all going to work for GE or Rolls-Royce, or Kimberly-Clark. Are they global companies or domestic companies? Obvious. So I start on a campaign to build what I call a global engineer. And so the program I built eventually, it's been going 20 years. We've had 1,000 students go through it. Basically, I divided the world into 6 billion people, 1 billion each. I picked one strategic partner for each billion. Karlsruhe in Germany, Shanghai Jiaotong in China, IIT Bombay in India, Monterey Tech in South America, National University of Rwanda in Africa, It's a reciprocal program. So just say 21-year-old woman from a farm in Indiana. You speak any languages? Yeah, I speak some Mandarin because I worked in China for 6 months. Yeah, do you have a network? Yeah, I've got friends from China and Germany. I was on a 2-semester design team with them. Would you hire this woman? Short answer is yeah. So that costs money to run that program, but the companies saw the value proposition and donors also saw. That's the second thing. And then I think the data mine, the working with companies in the Rockies is the third thing I'm proud of.
The data mine in the Rockies, I think, has been, for me, I've really enjoyed working on it. And it's been such a cool thing to see. I mean, the reason that we can go forward with the National Space Data Mine is because Data Mine of the Rockies has worked.
Exactly.
And not only have we put over 200 students through the project in 3 semesters, we have our defense partners are coming back. They're recurring customers, and they're saying that we need more of this, right? And so we can't accommodate in Colorado all of the needs. We need more schools. And so I think that's a huge testament to the need, to the solution that we're providing, and the people that we have involved in it. I mean, I just think it's all kind of come together to be this really perfect storm where it is kind of like a scrappy startup in a lot of ways, and we're figuring it out and it's working.
Well said. Yes.
What are you most proud of, Jill? Does anything come to mind? After I asked Dan that question, I was like, what am I most proud of? I don't know.
What am I most proud of? I kind of am proud of the fact that I've had so many different jobs that I've gotten to do really random things. And finding innovation in each job that I had has been a fun thing. Before I worked in reality television in LA, I worked for WGBH in Boston. And I loved working there. I worked with Suzanne Simpson, and we were making IMAX films, and they were all science films. And so we would have to sell them to all the different science theaters. We were producing one about special effects, and the way to get a film financed then, we got an NSF grant, but we also had to find more money to cover it because we were working with Lucasfilm, and this was before you could take anything digital and blow it up to IMAX. You couldn't do that back then. So we wanted to shoot the Death Star from the original Star Wars, that opening scene in IMAX. That one shot that was only a few seconds long, wasn't even 30 seconds long. It was like 5 seconds long, and it cost us over $1 million to make
Wow.
that in IMAX. And so when we were trying to raise money for the film, we had to create a consortium of all the theaters. And I remember I built a spreadsheet that basically you could plug in every contract with every theater we got, and we'd know how many tickets they had to sell to cover their part of the contract so that we could afford to make the film and distribute it to all of them. So they all became partners with us. I was so proud of it because we made a lot of business decisions based on that. It was building the data from one ticket buyer to the next to see if we could actually afford to make this film. And the good news is when we released it, it got nominated for an Oscar in the short form documentary category in 1996. So I got to go to the Oscars that year, which was really fun. We didn't win. We lost to a woman who did a documentary about a man in an iron lung, but we were really proud of that film and what we did on that.
So your spreadsheet, did the different partners contribute in different amounts based on their size or their expected gross, or how did you do that?
Yes, the theaters were different sizes and they were in different markets. They were all over the world. Like we had the La Giaude in France, we had the Houston Natural Science Museum, we had the Denver Museum, we had science and natural history museums all over the country and all over Europe, trying to define each one of their business plans and build it into that.
Proportional authorities.
Yes, that was the closest I got to a NSF grant, was doing budgets for it.
That's as close as you want to be. I've done NSF grants. They're a lot of work.
Sure.
So, other than global domination for data science workforce development, are there any other goals or missions that you want to share before we sign off of this episode?
I think that captures it, because when we believe this is scalable around the globe, you have to keep up with the pace of advancement in data science. But there's probably one thing that's not scalable, and that is the one-on-one negotiation with each entity. So there's a balance there that we need to kind of walk the line, but that's what we need to scale up to global scale.
And also some uniformity in universities.
That's true. This week, I'm working with the Space Force to add some Texas universities to some teams this semester. And so they're all very different. If you're going to go across multiple universities with all different majors and degrees and requirements and internship allowability, it does add some complexity to do that. But I think it's very important to get that cross fertilization. So there's a value proposition trade-off there. It certainly costs more money to do that. So we think it's worth it, but we need to keep getting the data, as you asked way back, Jill. What's the assessment look like? How much better is it for a student who's been on a capstone team versus the same project run as a data mine project?
Well, thank you for being on the show. We really appreciate your time. We really appreciate that you came on today and shared all of this with us.
Well, it was a lot of fun. I appreciate the questions, appreciate the time with you guys, and all the best on your new venture.
Thank you so much, Dan. It was great to have you on the show.
My pleasure.
You can find Data Mine of the Rockies at dataminерockies.org, and you can find Purdue's The Data Mine at datamine.purdue.edu. And you can find us at 2bu.co. That's TWOBU.co. Do good, do it now, and do it often.